Millions displaced and more reports of atrocities in Ukraine. We're on the front line as Russia tightens the vice, shelling a school in Mariupol. And the stories of those who have escaped are hard to hear.
You can't see anything because you don't have any light, and you only see something when there is another explosion.
Shootings from the front, shootings from the left, right, behind.
Also on the programme, waiting for a new life away from the war. More than 50 orphans who have been trapped begin their journey to the UK. Meanwhile, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, warns that sanctions on Russia will inevitably hit pockets here. Good evening. There have already been many atrocities during the war in Ukraine. Today, reports of another. A school that was being used as an air raid shelter by hundreds of people has been bombed. Women, children and the elderly were inside and many are feared trapped, injured or dead, although there has been no independent confirmation of what happened. Addressing the Israeli parliament after the attack, Ukraine's President Zelensky compared Russia's invasion to the actions of the Nazis. Once again, he asked for more help. Today, the United Nations said 10 million people, a quarter of the entire population, have either been forced from their homes or fled abroad. Our correspondent Geraint Vincent has the latest from Ukraine.
Out of Ukraine's clear blue skies, missiles rain. But in Mariupol, the ground war goes street by street. These pictures appear to show a detachment of Chechen infantrymen, Russia's fearsome allies who have joined an increasingly merciless assault. The city's authorities claim that another atrocity took place this morning. An art school being used as a shelter by 400 women, children and elderly people, bombed by the invaders. Ukraine's president addressed Israeli parliamentarians today. Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish, likened Russia's invasion to the Holocaust, and he challenged Israel over its failure to provide his country with military support. Russia, meanwhile, says it has provided refuge to people fleeing the fighting. Ukraine says Moscow has broken international law again by deporting residents of Mariupol and forcing them to go to Russia. What's beyond doubt is that thousands of refugees from the city have chosen to make the journey west. Among them, 2 teenagers now here in Lviv, who can tell you exactly what it's like to have your home destroyed around you.
I woke up from this very loud noise. I can't even describe this noise, but it was so loud, and you can't see anything because you don't have any light, and you only see something when there is another explosion. So everything was covered in a cement dust, and our doors between the rooms were broken in halves, and our windows with their frames, they were pushed in the room. Not like the glass of the window was broken, but our windows with plastic frames were pushed in the rooms, and we only had holes in the walls.
Julia and Rustik both escaped Mariupol last weekend. Rustik filmed the start of his journey out of the city. It wasn't the first time he and his parents had tried to leave.
There were shootings everywhere, like you were sitting in a car and shootings from the front, shootings from the left, right, behind, and I was like, Jesus, and what now? We decided not to leave that day. That was the first time I actually got really scared for my life.
Their hometown is a mainly Russian-speaking city, but their view of Russia is very different now.
These neighbors aren't really nice to us.
They say they're liberating you.
God, thank you for liberating me from my flat, from my grandparents, from half of my friends. Great. I feel so liberated now, so free, so homeless.
For those who've chosen to stay in Mariupol or who can't leave, life in the city has become a matter of survival, where even the shelters aren't safe. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Western Ukraine.
One of the prime targets of the war has been the capital, Kyiv. There, the situation is getting ever more desperate by the day. ITV News has seen evidence of a recent attack on a major food store, leading to fears of a change in tactics by Russia. Our global security editor, Rohit Kachru, reports from Kyiv.
We followed the smoke across Kyiv. It took us east towards a suburb called Brovary, a place we found the Russians trying but so far failing to take. Until a few days ago, this was a food distribution warehouse. Deliveries are still due, but they'll never be made. If Putin's plan is to starve the city, this might be part of it. The building isn't completely destroyed. Maybe this is why. Down the road, there's more damage. But a passerby wants to show us something else. There's a missile here, apparently intercepted, the target unknown. We've established it's a type of cruise missile, often used by the Russian military. Expensive, high-tech, and fired from many miles away. But it didn't make it to wherever it was supposed to. Then he reveals something from his past. He was a first responder after the Chernobyl disaster. And he says what's happening now is far worse. Another woman from the neighborhood joins us. She's 92 years old and is moving between friends' homes to feel safer. She'll stay in town as long as she can.
Ні, Боже збав, куди вже виїжджати? От туди он кладбище.
Then to the local hospital, where we're surprised to hear American accents.
Grandma,
My God, are you still there?
I got blown up by a mine.
Foreign fighters phoning home with news their vehicle hit a mine.
Split second later, like the whole car lifted up, came down. I remember being conscious the whole time. I checked my friends, made sure they were okay. We couldn't get the guy out in front. And his head was just, his whole face was just disfigured. His legs were gnarled and broken. And hey, Dad's calling me. Let me talk to you.
She's a student from Texas who will soon fly home, but plans to return to the front line.
I feel like there's still more work to be done. I feel like I can still help people. I don't necessarily know if I can do that right now with this leg, but if I heal up in the US, I would absolutely come back out here.
The rubble tells the story of Putin's plans for Brovary, but his troops will find that other people here have plans too.
Well, Rohit is in the Ukrainian capital tonight. Rohit, we've seen more shelling across the country. What's the atmosphere like there in Kyiv?
Well, in the last couple of hours, we saw something and heard something that we haven't heard so loudly and seen so close to the centre of this city during 25 days of this conflict. Have a listen to this. This is anti-aircraft artillery firing at targets above us here in central Kyiv. Not clear if these were targeting manned aircraft or missiles. We don't know. We heard surface-to-air missiles too. The Ukrainian air defences have been very active. They've also been very effective so far during this conflict. But what we're also hearing from Moscow this evening, from Russia's Ministry of Defense, is this warning to the Ukrainians. They're telling them that they should tell them whether or not they plan to surrender Mariupol by the early hours of this morning. They've not said what they will do if the Ukrainians don't, and they almost certainly won't, but this does sound ominous.
All right, Rohit in Kyiv, thank you very much. Well, the US President Joe Biden is preparing to travel to Europe this week for face-to-face meetings with other leaders. Let's speak now to our US correspondent Emma Murphy, who's in Washington. Emma, why is this trip so important?
Well, it's crucially important because it's an opportunity for NATO leaders to meet face to face to assess where they're up to in terms of the situation in Ukraine and what they can do to offer help in the days, weeks and months ahead. It definitely is the most significant visit of an American president to Europe in decades. And President Biden is a big believer in face-to-face diplomacy. He believes in sitting around a table and thrashing out how they can move forward in any crisis. And certainly this is the biggest crisis that many of these leaders have faced. We understand that this weekend there's been work going on amongst representatives of different governments to try and work out what would be the step forward, what they can actually offer as concrete support to Ukraine, what can be announced at that meeting. But there is some divergence of opinion about how far they will go. So they're trying to work that out at the moment. It's possible that President Biden will also visit the eastern flank of Europe to show solidarity there as well.